Where are you at? What are you doing in this exact moment? I would be willing to say that very many of you are in the comfort and warmth of your home, listening to this speech, listening to the words coming out of my mouth under a blanket. Maybe even a blanket like this one here. This type of blanket is called a chunky yarn blanket. Many people don't know just how easy it is to hand make a chunky yarn blanket. I myself have made very many of these types of blankets, and I have done additional research to be able to teach you how to make this type of blanket today. Today, I would like to tell you the materials needed to make this type of blanket, the steps it takes, and some additional things that you can do to make it unique and personalized. So, let's start out by talking about the materials needed to make a chunky yarn blanket. The very first and most important material that will make up your whole entire blanket is the yarn. Here I have some gray yarn that I have made into this blanket here. Your choice of yarn will be the very most important thing. You can go from any thickness to any thinness, from any color that you want of yarn. It is completely up to you. The second most important thing that you will need is scissors. You will need scissors to begin, end, and switch from color to color in your blanket if you choose to do so. You will tie off knots in your blanket, and then you will need to cut off the additional yarn. Now that we have talked about the materials needed to make a blanket, let's move on to the steps it actually takes to make the blanket. Making a chunky yarn blanket is a series of steps that you repeat over and over again, which make loops that turn into look like braids. So the very first step that you will make will be the very most important step because you will repeat it several times. To make the very first step, you will need to have your yarn and make a loop. From the very end of your yarn, you will make a loop with your fingers and pull the long end of the yarn through the loop. Fasten this to make it tight. Once you have done this, you have your very first loop. You will continue to make loops like this for the entire blanket. You will then pull the long end of the yarn through this first loop to make your next loop. You will continue making these loops through this next piece of yarn to see your braid. Once you have your braid, you will realize the blanket is coming together. You will continue to do this to the very end of your row. Once you decide that you're at the end of the row, you will need to make a loop facing upwards so that you can go on to the next row. To make this loop, you will twist the end piece of yarn twice to make an upward loop. Once you have your upward loop, you will pull the yarn through just as you have done several times now to make an upward loop. You are now on your next row of the blanket. Once you're on this row, you will continue to do just as you have done the previous row. You will continue to make your blanket as long as you want it to be. Once you have decided that you would like to complete your blanket, you will fasten off your blanket with your final loop. Your final loop will be as a normal loop. When you get to your final loop, you will tie off the end of the yarn after you go through the final loop with a double knot. Using your pointer, your middle, and your thumb, you will pull the knot very fast and tight to a first knot. Then you will additionally make a second knot on top very tightly. Once you have done this, you will have completed your blanket. Snip off the edge of the existing yarn and you will be done with your blanket. Now that you know the process to actually make the blanket, we can move on to some additional things that you may want to do to your blanket to make it personalized and unique to you. If you have your blanket and you have extra yarn, you can always add a design to the border. You can add tassels, you can add a border around the outside of it. You can also make it personalized by adding different colors, or you can use patterns in your blanket by specializing a certain amount of rows to a certain amount of colors. Now that we have talked about all of these things, let's wrap this speech up and bring them all together. Today we talked about the two main materials needed to make a chunky yarn blanket, the steps it actually takes to make a chunky yarn blanket, and a few different ways that you can personalize your chunky yarn blanket. So, in the words of the famous blanket maker Amberosa Nelson, if you have creativity and you want to give it a try, I say go for it. Because in the words of me, A homemade blanket can bring the warmth and comfort to the heart, just like it can to your body. Thank you guys. Bye.